All right. Today's presentation is a very brief report of a comprehensive literature review I've been doing on post-process theory in second language writing. For my literature review, I have been taking three distinct steps. First, I focused on post-process theory in compositional studies. Then I particularly focused on what second language writing researchers have said about post-process theory. Then eventually I looked for some instances of practice. I don't think we'll have enough time today to go through all these three steps separately. So what I'm going to do basically, I'm going to give you a definition of post-process theory in second language writing based on a combination of ideas of compositional studies researchers and second language writing researchers. Then, providing we have enough time, I'll give you, and I hope we will, I'll give you some examples of practice as well. So, because I'm new to this thing, presenting online, and I want to avoid any form of confusion. So I'll go through the presentation for something about 20 minutes. Please feel free to type your questions, but we'll deal with your questions at the end when I'm finished with the presentation. So let's just start with defining post-process writing. Defining post-process writing is a bit difficult, like defining any post-movement thing. Post-movements are difficult to define because basically when you want to define a post-movement, you deny the movement itself, but at the same time you recognize some things in that movement because you want to broaden the movement. So that's really the difficulty with defining post-process as well, because post-process writing is still process writing, but trying to go beyond process writing. So it makes it a very, very difficult job, and in different parts of literature, people who have started talking about post-process writing, they have consciously dealt with this difficulty. Most of the writers I have read just say that post-process writing is really a broadening the possibilities that process writing offers. Of course, with some criticism and some errors which should be corrected. So to start talking about post-process writing, we have to inevitably talk a bit about, to start talking about post-process writing, we have to inevitably talk about process writing as well. Process writing, which has been the dominant discourse, the dominant pedagogy in the discourse of compositional studies in North America over the past 4 decades, practically criticized the product-based approach to writing. When teachers would give students a topic, students would go back home, they would come back to the classroom with a written product, and the teacher's duty was grading those written products, the final products, and correcting the errors, usually in red. So they advocated that writing doesn't happen as a final product. They emphasize that good writers, successful writers, go through a process. That process includes, for example, the following steps: brainstorming, a conversation, pre-writing, multi-drafting, receiving feedback from your peers and your teacher, revising, editing, and eventually publishing, because you don't want to write for an audience of one, the teacher, but you want to share your work with the world. So this has been more or less the dominant form of pedagogy. Even still today, I suppose, if teachers walk their students through these steps, I think what they do is considered pretty progressive. Post-process theory, however, criticizes this approach based on 2 basic arguments. So the first argument is, writing is not one single process that can be codified and taught. So when you suggest that I know what the process of writing is, first you've got to brainstorm, then you've got to, for example, do your first draft and editing and the rest, you are suggesting that there is one single process, and that process can be codified and taught. To be honest, I mean, for me personally, that would be a nightmare to go through all those steps. Still today, even as a PhD student, if my teachers ask me to give them an outline of my final paper, I usually finish the paper first, then create an outline out of that, because that's my process of writing. So, seemingly, there is more than one process. There are processes of writing. And if we look at it this way, it would be very difficult to codify all these processes. There is another danger as well. If you believe that there is only one process of writing, I think you are suggesting at the same time that there is one dominant genre, because the process that teachers advocated usually led to writing essays, and essay writing became the dominant genre of classroom teaching. So if you emphasize one process, and if you codify one process, you're gonna end with what we have faced in North American rhetoric. You're gonna have a kind of unconditional admiration for essayist literacy. Therefore, essayist literacy and the rhetoric of assertion, because when you write an essay, you've got a point that you've got to assert, you've got a topic sentence, and you've got to support it with details. So this rhetoric of assertion, which has been the dominant model of rhetoric in North American schools, should be challenged in order to broaden genre possibilities. So post-process researchers say there isn't only one process. If you imagine that there is one process of writing, you're talking about the essay, the Anglo-American essay. So in post-process writing classes, you've got to broaden these genre possibilities. Moreover, moving beyond assertive and essayist discourses will liberate the students' agencies. So it's not only for the sake of creating better writers. At the same time, as writing teachers, we hope to liberate the students' agencies. Because there has been a lot of discussion in feminist literature that the essay is essentially a patriarchal form of writing. So if we go beyond the essay, women would be more comfortable in our classes, that they can express themselves. So, for example, immigrants who come to our classes come from different rhetorics, different cultures, different writing backgrounds. So their agencies will be liberated as well. Some underprivileged North American kids might be more comfortable with the tradition of oral expression. So those agency will be liberated, and they can just take charge of the writing they have for their own sake as well. So this is the first line of argument. The second line of argument starts with this proposition that there is no simple pedagogy to employ in the classroom in order to teach writing as an individual activity to students. So we cannot really imagine that there is a pedagogy we possess as teachers. We cannot imagine that we're teaching an art or a technique as an individual activity to a person. So I cannot sit next to a student and tell them how to write beautifully, because writing is not an individual activity, and there is not one single pedagogy which can address this individual need in quotation marks. So post-process writing theorists suggest that teachers need to move beyond the classroom as the only rhetorical situation. The reality is a lot of good writing is not really done in the classroom. I'm sure if you talk to successful writers, they might they might really testify to this, that a lot of good writing happens outside the classroom. So we have to find ways to move beyond the classroom. And the role as the possessor of the techne of writing should be seriously questioned as well. Techne is a Greek word. Technology comes from this, and technique comes from this. So I think next to moving beyond the classroom, post-process theory suggests that we have to think again of our role as teachers. Probably we should get out of this role, this traditional role of I know the technique and I'm going to teach you the technique. So based on this, written texts should be regarded as products of a complicated web of cultural practices, social interactions, power differentials, and discursive conventions. To simplify that with an example, if I write an assignment for my professors at OEC, I'm not doing that because I simply possess a technique and I'm a good writer, and I'm going to make a product as an individual. No, I have to do my papers not because I'm a good writer sitting in a classroom writing, because I have a position in the world. And that position for me is, for example, at the moment, a researcher, an academic, or a teacher who is gearing towards becoming a researcher. And this position in the world, with all the networks around me, including my professors, including my students, including my wife, who is an academic as well, this position around me drives me to write a paper. And, of course, some power games as well. That I write a paper to publish it, to write it down on my resume. So it's really very simplistic to think that I write because of my position as a good writer, as an individual good writer in the world. So it is very important in our classes to consider this kind of networks that we are situated in, if we want, or our students are situated in, if we want to help them write better. So to give you another example of this, I think I guess that most of the people in this room are related somehow to, or probably all are related somehow to education, and our friends are definitely more likely to be better writers than the friends of, for example, a thief in a prison in Kingston, for example. Why? Not because we are cleverer or we are more intelligent individuals who have been able to learn the art of writing better. Simply because we have been positioned in the world in the way that those people haven't. So if you're teaching them how to write, but we have to really consider the surroundings they are situated in and the image they have themselves as writers. So to sum it up, teaching writing is basically teaching knowledge design. Teaching writing is teaching rhetorical sensitivity and hermeneutic guessing through a large number of literate activities. So if we want to create good writers, probably just telling them what a topic sentence is and how to support topic sentences and giving them a list of, for example, adverbs which could create cohesion in a piece of writing would be great, but that would be one part of knowledge design. So knowledge design really takes more of that. Knowledge design starts with a student identity, who you are in the world, and what you want to achieve with your writing. Who is going to write your writing? What genres they expect you to write? And what power games have created those genres? And how you, as an individual with a kind of unique background, can challenge those genres and those power games. So have you done enough literate activities to do this? How is it possible to write a convincing piece about, for example, the foreign policy of Canada today, when you don't have the cultural literacy or the history literacy that involves a kind of social life in Canada and political life in Canada. So probably good writers have those forms of literacy as well. Probably good writers are not only people who can follow grammatical rules, of course they should do that, but probably teaching grammar, the best place to teach grammar is not really in a writing class, that's in a grammar class. Probably teaching good writing is teaching that if you want to write good, you have to go and acquire that knowledge as well. They just problematize teaching writing in a sense that teaching writing is not only teaching writing, it's teaching 100 other things as well. And because we cannot do that all in one classroom, we can tell our students that this is the network of knowledge you have to acquire. So I know that probably there were a lot of technical and abstract terms. Let's see how, but it's not really as abstract as it sounds when we look at some instances of practice. This picture is not here to show. I've borrowed that from Pink Floyd's The Wall. It's not here really to show us what our classrooms should look like. The picture is here just to show us what the students shouldn't look like in our classes. If you imagine that you can teach writing to students like this, that you've got one code that all these students are gonna learn. Post-process theory suggests you're mistaken. The examples that they give of pedagogy, post-process pedagogy, include these. Writing-centered pedagogy is a very, very convenient example of what post-process writing is. So writing centers are created not because there is a teacher who can teach you how to write. That's a form of support. And you go to them when you have questions. Is my voice there? Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. So I said that writing-centered pedagogy is a very good example of post-process writing because of two reasons. Because it undermines the position of the teacher as the possessor of techne, the technique. Second, writing-centered pedagogy is a way of getting out of the classroom. So you write pretty in a very natural flow. You write, you have doubts, you simply just consult with someone, and you find your own way. And consulting means really consulting in a writing-centered pedagogy. It means that you put what they say into practice if you deem appropriate for you. So a writing-centered pedagogy, particularly in educational establishments, is a very safe place, because writing, particularly when you're writing for a teacher, you are involved in a lot of power games. So writing-centered consultants are very, very safe people to go to, because you don't have really that power relation with them. Another very interesting example of a post-process writing, teaching post-process writing, would be community service writing courses. I find it really fascinating, because I never did that really before I started to write about post-process writing. We teach our students to write resumes, application letters, but I was wondering, for example, in Toronto, where there are a lot of settlement places and institutions that help newcomers. I really regretted not taking my students out to those places and asked them to help real newcomers who really need to write good resumes to get jobs, or to write good application letters. So this form of writing, I think, is fascinating, particularly when it comes to newcomers, to immigrants, getting our students to go to those places, to get their hands dirty, and to actually write something meaningful. Broadening and blending genres, there have been a lot of examples of that in literature. People who have written in different genres, and people who have written in different languages even. I'm moving through fast because we're running out of time. Using oral history techniques, getting our students to go out, talk to people, write down, transcribe the responses, edit the responses, form a piece of writing based on those oral histories. A project-based approach is a very suitable approach, particularly when you're teaching underprivileged kids, and when you want them to create canons of the literature they usually produce, or when you're teaching newcomers and you invite them to introduce their own literature to you through a kind of project-based approach, creating a tiny little canon of their own literature, or the social problems, the social issues, the political concerns. I've always found Jim Cummins' identity texts a very, very kind of effective post-process technique. Just giving this chance to students to use different systems of literacy they are familiar with and are comfortable with. And eventually, a kind of ethnographical approach, again, asking the students to situate themselves in different social issues and write about those issues with, with considering themselves and their own positions to those issues. So I wish I had more time to focus on practice a bit more, but I suppose this is all I can do today. So I would be more than happy to answer any questions you have. There was one question about agency. When we're talking about agency, I think this is a kind of post-structural concept. Can everyone hear me? Can I be heard? Okay, great. The reality is traditional essayist literacy advocated a very objective form of writing, or trying to pretend to be objective. Still, I hear serious discussions about if we should use I in our writing when we are writing essays. Particularly, I think it came from the feminist camp, that essayists and post-colonial camp as well. The reality is that the essay is a very masculine form of writing. So when you get your students to write essays only, you're practically filtering out the agency of your female students on the one hand, and the agency of students who come from other cultures who don't usually express themselves in the form of the essay. When you broaden the genre possibilities, you let your students be present in those pieces of writing. For example, if you let your students write poetry in writing classes, they can be present in those pieces of writing. And if they are present in those pieces of writing, if they are women, if you have, for example, gay and lesbian students, if you have a minority of students, they can express themselves, and that is going to be, I mean, they can practically have some sort of agency to be present, not only in that piece of writing that I'm giving you as a teacher, in the bigger conversation, which includes a lot of power games. I'm trying to answer to this question. I'm unsure I understand how it is a masculine form of writing. Poetry is feminine, for example. Yes, I have to say I'm just reporting what these people say. Although I personally believe that the essay is a masculine form of writing. To answer that question, we have to go to the history of rhetoric in the West. Feminists believe that the essay became the dominant form of writing after the Industrial Revolution, and because of the kind of colonial approach to war. They believe that that was mainly the form which upper class European men wrote in. Yes, poetry seems to be based on the writings of those feminists. Poetry is definitely a more feminine form of writing. It doesn't mean that men didn't write poetry. The same feminists believed that the way James Joyce wrote was very feminine. Yes, diary writing was letter writing, diary writing. They consider these kind of feminine forms of writing. Is post-process writing creating authentic text? Definitely. That's really definitely the purpose. That's why they really emphasize that you, of course, process writing emphasizes this as well, that you have to create authentic text for an authentic audience, which is really more than one, which is usually the teacher. So definitely the idea of writing, authentic writing, rather than just practicing all the time to write, and we are never good enough as writers, is definitely there. Okay, letter writing, report writing. Exactly. Report writing, announcement writing, the storytelling, definitely. Post-process writing definitely advertises this idea that there are hundreds of different genres, and our students should be writing all the time and should be exposed to all these different forms of writing. Yeah, definitely that's one of the doctrines of post-process writing. You should write essays as well, but you cannot write good essays if you're not really aware of this network of different forms of writing, because that is what really it is all about. It is not about writing only, it is about power games, it is about your position as a student, as a newcomer, as a woman, as a gay student in the world. So you have to be able to play with all these genres. Okay, during our presentation I was able to reflect on my own approach to assembling paragraphs using project-based learning. Some of the studies you mentioned have validated some. Oh, that's absolutely great. And that you have been doing, and definitely all of you have been practicing a lot of this. All I'm trying to say is we have to really highlight this kind of practice, because we are not really sometimes aware that we are practicing this, and because when we have this awareness, we can do simply more of that. Yeah, a lot of what post-process writing is advocating is not necessarily very new, because I'm personally against this narrative of progress, So I'm sure that you have been doing a lot of that. Yes, that's not. I'm trying to answer this question. Is this the session you submitted to? Yes, this is really the base of that session, because that's going to be a longer session. It's going to be 1 hour. So I hope I can give really tangible examples of practice in that presentation as well. So for EAP students, the essay is the product, and the students feel such a stress about this form. Can we educate regarding? Okay. Definitely, I think what I'm trying to suggest here is not really we should forget about the essay. I think we should go a step beyond the essay itself. I think those stressful students would feel even more comfortable when we tell them about the power games behind these classes. Yet they need to write essays, and they really need to write good essays. But they should have an awareness of this power game, that why, for example, in the academia in North America, we need to write essays, and what historical backgrounds have created that. What are the consequences of not writing good essays? And how we can challenge this form of essay writing. Yeah, so I'm not suggesting we shouldn't write essays. I'm suggesting we should go one step beyond that, answering this question, why we're trying to write essays. I have experienced this myself as a teacher. I believe that if we talk to our students about what power games have created the form of essay and why today we have to write essays, I think they'll feel a bit more comfortable. Yes, Tyson, I believe that would be, because, yeah, I think that would be a different presentation, and I'm going to focus really more on practice. Yes, sure. Would you please clarify identity texts? Yeah, identity texts this initiative started off with Professor Jim Cummins. Identity texts are any form of texts, because when we're talking about texts, we are really talking about any semiotic system. It means we talk about written passages, but we talk about paintings, we talk about buildings, we talk about videos. So identity texts are a kind of free semiotic form of creation. We let our students to express their own identities in any way they want. So these are basically identity texts. Identity texts might be poems, might be essays, might be bilingual passages. Dr. Cummins focused mainly on bilingual passages. There might be bilingual videos. There might be bilingual songs. Just giving the students this freedom of expressing themselves in any form of semiotic system. Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We haven't had this kind of live connection, but the questions have been fascinating. So I hope that, although I might have sounded a bit abstract when trying to define post-process writing, I hope you've taken something away. I plan to present, if they accept my application in TESOL Toronto conference in the spring. I hope I can focus more on practice in that presentation. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your comments and your participation. It's been a great experience for me. I hope you can take something away from that. If there are no questions, I think we can say goodbye. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.